ferocious ni pana ho joji. Thank you.
We now have the Christian prayer by Deepti.
Our Father who art in heaven,
Deepti, you're fading out.
It's not clear, Deepti.
Yeah.
Your sound.
Audio. Put off your video and start.
That thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today
I think there's a problem with Deepti's. Okay. We now have Gulu.
Yeah, now it's okay. Now it's okay now.
Okay, then please say the prayer. and
Hello?
then we move. Okay. Are you saying it, Deepti? We still can't hear. We'll have it after Gulu's prayer. The Sikh prayer by Gulu, please. Gulu?
एक ओंकार सतनाम करता पुरख निर्भव निर्वैर अकाल मूरत अजोनी सैभं गुरु प्रसाद
The introduction.
आद सच
Yeah,
जुगाद सच है भी सच नानक हो से भी सच सोचे सोच न होवै जे सोचे लखवार चुप चुप न होवै जे लाए रहा लिवतार भूखिया भूख न उतरी जे बन्ना पुरिया भार सहस्याणा पालक होवै त एक न चले नाल किव सचियारा होइए किव कूरे टुटे पाल हुक्म रजाई चल रहा नानक लिखिया नाल वाहिगुरु जी दा खालसा वाहिगुरु जी दी फतेह बोले सो निहाल सत श्री अकाल.
Thank you, Gulu. Deepti, now I hope everything's okay. Kindly introduce our speaker. Deepti? Okay, Malti, will you do that? I don't think Deepti's audio is okay. Malati Janaki. Deepti, is it okay, your audio? We
Hello?
can't hear you. Kindly
Yeah.
introduce
Can
our
you hear me
speaker.
now?
We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay.
Please introduce our speaker.
Our speaker for today. Yeah. Our speaker for today is Anuja Jacob. Anuja Jacob has been in corporate sales for about 20 years. She worked in organizations like Sun Microsystems, Symantec, and HP. Her corporate work life helped to stay contextual and relatable. She's also a healer and a certified self-awareness life coach. On her path for more than 9 years, practicing regularly, she has been conducting guided meditation for the last 4-5 years and has participants from across the globe. She also leads a Vedantic contemplation group. Currently, she's the program director at My Persona, a leadership consulting firm, and also facilitates stress management sessions for clients. Welcome to today's satsang, Ms. Anuja Jacob.
Thank you, Deepti. And now it's over to Anuja. Over to you, Anuja.
Am I visible, audible?
Yes, both visible and audible.
Yes, ma'am, clearly. Okay. Good evening and namaste and welcome to this session. I think before I begin the presentation on the meditating mind, a quick introduction to myself, though Deepti has done most of it, so that it sets the context. So yes, I had a very thriving and stressful corporate life. And about 9, 10 years back, life took on another trajectory altogether. And I went into answers, looking for answers which would say, why does life suck so much? So it was on my own, and a lot of things happened since then. I got into meditation on my own, and then I got a lot of help, a lot of yoga, a lot of healing. Since then, I also got back to work, as in I was hired by corporates, and I just felt that was not my calling up until now. There were a lot of exchange of healing myself and engaging other people and helping them heal. When I was healing, because when I started doing the meditation on my own, and I think after some time at least, I realized that there was a little instinct that was developing, at least for people who were very close by. So I said, how do I help them? So I said, okay, let's see if I can do some healing. So I enrolled to become a healer, and which I do also. When I was healing, I came to this understanding that no matter how much externally somebody is healed, until and unless they do not change the way they think and feel, and their perceptions don't alter, they would constantly keep coming back to the feeling of suffering, whether it's mental or emotional or physical. So I had to start talking to them and understanding why do they feel, or why do they think the way they feel or think. And then, of course, there had to be a method to this madness. So I said, might as well get myself certified to be a coach, because then I would have at least some backing of a certification, and credibility would probably be more safer then. So I became a coach, and I coached people. And in the meantime, I was still working as a faculty doing stress management and leadership. And about 3 years ago, I joined this company that I currently am in, which is the leadership consulting team. And what we do here is that we work with large corporates, and we help their leadership, their CXOs or CXO -1 levels. We help them into acquiring and exposing them to leadership personas which are unique to them, and see how they can actually adopt those, what they find in themselves, their own strengths, their own USPs. My job is mostly to do a lot of client work, which is a lot of selling, program management. So I make sure that the entire engagement is handled together. I am not so esoteric then. For the last 4 or 5 years, I was doing this guided meditation, which I sort of put together because it had to be a little more faith agnostic. I felt people should be able to relate to it and not get turned away or put away with. So started with the guided meditation. And what happened about 2 years ago in March, when the COVID hit, and we were all stranded and everybody was under lock and key in their own homes, I think it became very pertinent then to make sure that this was available to everybody. So I started conducting it on Zoom, and it thrived. And I just finished after 2 years run on my own. We were doing it thrice a week. So while I was doing this, I think somewhere last year or end of last year, while the whole pursuit of meditation was very spiritual for me, it continues to be. I meditate because that is the only way I know, and that is my only eventual goal. It was important that I tell the people whom I guide that other than the spiritual proximity or the awakening or the inroad journey or anything which is in that context or that vocabulary, other than that, there is a difference that is happening to you. And so I did a little bit of research. I'm not a doctor, I'm not technical. I think I'm the lowest common denominator in technology and science that could ever be. But I thought, let me do some research and see what is it that I can bring to the people who meditate, so that they can go back home and know that, they be rest assured. A slight shift in those who were skeptics about meditation. And so I put together this a session, what happens to your brain when you meditate. Okay, so I'm going to share this with you now. And if you can see your screen, I also would request if one of you could have your video on, so I don't feel like I'm talking to a blank screen. It would be really nice if one of you could do that, please. Can you see my screen? Can you see the presentation that I'm sharing?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, I can.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Deepti, for coming on. I don't know, is that the
1 minute. 1 minute. I have to just. Yes.
perfect? Great. So I can see your face and I'll talk. So it seems like I'm talking and I will not feel choked. Okay. So what happens to your brain when you meditate? I'm trying to keep it very, very light and easy. If I can understand this, anybody can understand this. So it is all physiology. I will not bring in spirituality in this session at all. We could, if you have questions, perhaps we can field them during the question answer session. This is just on brain physiology. Anybody who says it is all mumbo jumbo, then we have something to go back to them with. So what happens to our brain when we meditate? So what I'm going to tell you is not rocket science. It's all in your head. So it's just a manner of speaking. I would like to set the context right. I am not a doctor. So, if you're asking me questions, I may not be able to answer them very technically, but I'll try. I'm neither a researcher, neither I'm a person who was doing any work on this before. I was just a person who was helping people into meditation, because a lot of people have a lot of doubt, they fall off the radar, they don't know how to progress. So just keeping them there, and that's why I thought, let me just guide them into the meditation. And this is what I do. I try to bring as many people into the fold of meditation so that they are on their own. It's not that they're dependent on me, that they get onto their own practice or their own sadhana. And this was the reason why I did this section. This was my only objective. So before we start, while this could be an absolute Greek and Latin, this is what our brain looks like. Okay. It's a very, very extremely simplified view of the brain. I wanted to pay attention to a few of the things, which is why I've put them all there. And it doesn't matter if you don't remember where they are in this diagram. Look at the prefrontal cortex. Look at the amygdala. Look at the hippocampus. Look at the brain stem. Look at the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So look at all of them. Just have a look at all of this. So this is our brain. Okay. All right. So what it will happen is, what I'm going to tell you about is research which has been done and the findings of that research. I haven't done that research. They are done by technical, seriously, very, very serious scientists, doctors who've gone in and done this kind of work. I am just putting it together in a manner which is easily graspable, digestible, and I will try and connect the dots for you, those of you who do meditate, in fact. And I will try and connect the dots on what does it mean in terms of behavior. So if I'm talking about a part of the brain, what does it mean in terms of behavior? Now, the first thing I want you to pay attention to is something called as a default mode network. It's actually a network which happens in our brain all the time. So if I were to dramatize this, tell you something very funnily, it's like imagine a brain that is happening. So there's a lot of network because all components of the brain are coming together and they're exchanging information. And this is called as a default mode network. It's the largest network of functionally correlated brain paths. So this is the default mode network. In this network, I'm going to talk about 3 important parts of our brain. And I'm going to tell you what does it mean. So the first part, the 3 parts I'm going to tell you, which are there. There are other parts as well, but I'm going to tell you just 3 of them, which are very critical. The amygdala. Okay. So the amygdala in our brain is the oldest part of our brain. They say it's part of the reptilian brain. When we were reptiles, it's coming from there. It is the part of the brain which fires first, always. We just do not have the wherewithal, the sophistication, the precision to intercept when the amygdala starts working. So whenever we are faced with any threat, because it's a reptilian brain, it's the first to act. It has been in our system for the last 150 million years. It's extremely, extremely strong. We just can't fight this. It has only 3 responses, which is fight, flight, or freeze. So it is typically, I think it must have come as part of the evolution, because if you had any asteroid or meteorite striking you or a large animal chasing you down, you had the wherewithal to just run. So fight, either you fight the animal or you run or you just freeze. You would have seen those various Discovery channels in which a lot of animals pretend that they are dead. They just hang their head when they're captured by another higher animal. So this is a response. All of us have it. And what is interesting to know is this. When we feel threatened, amygdala is first to act. Always, always. We could feel threatened about a mail that we have to write. We could feel threatened about a relationship that is going down. We could feel threatened if there is a call or if there is a conversation that we've had which is not happening to our favor. At any of the slightest of threat that we perceive in our sophisticated minds, the first thing that comes to our rescue is the amygdala. But what does it do? Its job is only to help us fight, flight, and freeze. Now tell me at what place, and this is for your consideration, that if you are suffering from a perceived threat in your mind, is any of this useful? So if I'm fearful of the corona, if I'm fearful of the COVID, I feel threatened to go out, to have people over, whatever. I'm threatened. My body is getting prepared only to fight, flight, or freeze. At no point my body is getting ready to produce more antibodies. So there, the amygdala will only prepare us for these three when we feel threatened. And now our threats are very different. We are not getting chased by animals. There is no asteroid attack right now, no alien invasion happening right now. So this is amygdala, and you need to remember this because I will come back to it towards the end. A very, very interesting and a very lovely part of the brain is the hippocampus. This is also part of the old limbic brain. And what it does for us is it consolidates information from short-term memory to long-term memory. So anybody who feels memory loss, hippocampus begins to shrink. That is what is happening. Spatial memory, that helps in navigation. So we're reaching out, not falling, knowing your space around you. Learning, which is why a lot of schools call themselves hippocampus. It's a very big part of our understanding of self-awareness, compassion, and introspection. So it really, really makes us deep dive into who am I, which is why a lot of Greeks, hippocampus is a Greek word, and a lot of Greeks like Socrates, Aristotle, all of them were great thinkers, great philosophers. And they were the ones who really researched on the hippocampus. So it's one of the most researched part of the brain. And you people who really have a highly developed hippocampus, you would find a lot of self-awareness happening in there. They do a lot of introspection. Very interesting. Also does a lot of memory. So people who suffer from dementia, people who suffer from amnesia, hippocampus is the one which gets impacted. And then we have the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive brain. Now, what that does for us is that it does all the very sophisticated and very high-end activities for us. All our planning, decision-making, problem-solving, self-control, all the functions that we use nowadays. This peer group, which is listening to this conversation or this session today, we typically are using a lot of prefrontal cortex because we are doing that kind of work. Our office, our organizations, working at school, working at place of work, professionals, a lot has to do with prefrontal cortex. So most of the work is there. We are no longer, amygdala is not so much in requirement as much as prefrontal cortex is for us. So these are the three components of the brain, which I'm going to tell you about what happens when the meditation starts or when you're meditating. Coming back to default mode network, which basically is when the exchange of information is happening amongst various components of the brain. Something about this default mode network. When this is in action, when the default mode network is running, it's like a hum, like how you have when the power is out and your generator is running and there's a constant buzz like that in your head. So it's not buzzing. The constant sound that the talk, the chattering that happens in our mind, something is saying, somebody is saying, that is the DMN. It's most active when we are anywhere in our mind except for being in the now. That means constantly when we are worried about the past, that conversation I had, that meal I had, that episode that happened, or when we're anxious about the future. What is going to happen? Shall I do this? Shall I not do this? What will they think? What will they say? They always say things like this. So this constant chattering of the mind, of the brain, I'll use this word very carefully, of the brain is the DMN which is running all the time, constantly. It stops. This chattering stops. It stops at certain point of time. So the DMN this activity is not designed to make us happy. It has an evolutionary use to protect us. So this is happening in the brain because it's trying to figure out, where are you feeling threatened? What do I need to do? How do I protect this being? How do I protect? So it's constant. It's always running because there's always a threat. There's always a feeling of sadness. How do I take care? So it is not meant to give us joy. If it is an action, that means there is an alarm. It's feeling there is something wrong. That's why it's running over there, all constantly running. So it's not designed for happiness. So if it's there, it means that we are thinking that we are unhappy and something going to go wrong. People end up more unhappy if they let their minds wander. So if we do not know how to take control of the DMN, if the DMN is running on its own all the time, we would land up as very unhappy people. Because it's constantly is creating an environment of something is not right. Something has gone wrong. And when the threat is happening, then you know what is firing. The amygdala is coming into place. It's always preparing us to fight, flight, or freeze, which is why I think we put on weight. Because the system is asking us to run. I'm giving you all the resources for you to run or to fight. And we don't need that muscular, or we don't need that fat, we don't need that storing to happen in our body, because really our threat is a mental one. It is not a physical one, but the brain doesn't know. Okay, so this is about the DMN. I'm just giving you a graphical representation of what would it be to have an activated DMN as against a deactivated DMN when it is quiet, when there is no chattering happening in the brain. Luckily for us, the mind wandering is not always on. So there are times where this shuts, just there's quiet, there's peace happening. I've still not reached the meditation, so hold on. It's called being in the flow. When the DMN activity stops or gets deactivated, then we come to a place called as being in the flow. Now, what does being in the flow mean? These are all technical terms. I haven't created them. So these are all science will tell you, scientists will tell you. What does being in the flow mean? That means the hum is reduced or quietened. And when we're doing something active, something we love. So I want you to recall anything that you really enjoy. So you enjoy gardening, or you enjoy playing music, or you like baking or cooking or whatever, or craft or sports. If you're playing some basketball, I mean, people at that time, and we really enjoy, we are in it, completely doing that work. At that time, the DMN either stalls, goes down, or completely deactivates, and then we are in the flow. That's called as being in the flow, when you are just absolutely doing what you are doing and enjoying it. We feel our best. That's when you are in the flow. It's the optimal state of consciousness. Please don't confuse with the spiritual consciousness, that you are absolutely cognitively out there, present. You will pick up a flicker of change that happens. You're so present at that moment. You perform and feel your best. The task you were doing so absorbed that everything else seems to disappear. So you just focus on it. And I want you to think of those tasks that you do. Self-consciousness vanishes entirely and time dilates. So you are no longer conscious, oh, what will people think? What am I doing? All that doesn't happen. You're just doing it. And time dilates. There is a complete let up on time. You know how much time has gone, or maybe very little time has gone, and you feel, oh, I accomplished so much. A good sleep will typically do that for you also. Decision-making happens effortlessly. Every decision and action flows seamlessly into the next. And that is why it's called the flow. Again, these are all technical terms. I haven't created it. All of this has been documented by scientists. In the flow, the parts of the brain do not become hyperactive, but they deactivate. So understand that the brain becomes alive because it's feeling threatened. When it's feeling like it's enjoying the world and you are enjoying yourself, the brain will begin to just quieten down a little bit. The activities will start to cease. The prefrontal cortex shuts down or slows down for some time. So you're not conscious, what should I do this? Should I wear that? What should I eat? What should I make? What will they say? All of that, all of those begin to reduce substantially. Our inner critic goes off. So we are no longer feeling judged, neither other person judging us. All of that just goes off when we are in the flow. The same magic takes place and you feel free of that feeling of being limited. I am this, what am I, poor me or miserable me, or I am this, or people think like that. All of that me feeling is all gone. You just become one with whatever it is that you're doing. Creativity and risk taking also goes through the roof. So people who think in organizations, especially because we do a lot of these workshops for leaders, that people are not risk taking. People don't think out of the box. You know, those are the jargons that you keep hearing. They're not doing perhaps because they feel very judged. They feel very trapped. They feel what will happen. They're very worried of the consequences. But if one is in the flow, then those consequences don't seem to limit the behavior. Not that you will fly off the roof. It's just that you will not feel so hesitant and held back. You probably feel invincible. It's the most addictive state to be in. And why? Because look at all of these neurochemicals that get released in the brain. Neuroepinephrine, anandamide, which is actually the word derived from ananda only, serotonin, endorphins, dopamine. All of them get released in the brain. If we were to pick up a medicine which will have all of these three, we will all just conk off, because you cannot have a perfect mix of these drugs which are administered to other people. If we were to administer on our own, we would really collapse. It doesn't happen. But nature does that for us. Our brain does it for us. When we go quiet, when we are in the flow, it happens when you're doing something that we like. Our brain's default mode is the opposite of this enjoyable state of high focus and high performance. Normally, we are not like this. Normally, we are not in the flow. Normally, the DMN is going on, making sound, noise, telling us stories, having conversation, good, bad, ugly. It's the whole movie running in the head. Oh, I'm so sorry. Just go back. Now, meditation is as close to flowing as we can get. Meditators can also shut down their own inner critic. They shut down their own inner voice. But they're also able to do it not just when they are meditating, they can do it even when they're not meditating. They get that they're able to build that muscle, so to speak, that they're able to do that even when they're not meditating. They can shut down their default mode network and set a new one. So if I'm going to a meeting, I would have in my head, constantly imagining, I'm going for this meeting. They always call for this meeting. I don't know why so many meetings are held. These people don't even know. They have no respect for my time. They have no respect for anybody's time. Last time that meeting, what did it happen? So there's this constant chattering happening when I'm going into the meeting. Now, if there was some way that I could just shut up, let me just listen to what they have to say this time. They may have something interesting to tell me, or I may have something to contribute to this. So a meditator perhaps would be able to then switch off that chattering and move to the next. Say, okay, let me have a look at it, or let me just see what they have to say. So this is what I'm giving an example which is relatable at office. I think a lot of people would be able to relate to this. Sorry, there's something is the matter. Okay. So now this is what happened. This is the research done by this lady, Dr. Sarah Lazar, and you can please look her up on the YouTube, on the web, anywhere. She was helping the MGH Psychiatric Neuroimaging Research Program in Harvard Medical School, instructor in psychology. Very renowned, and enough and more talks are there on TED for her and all of that. So this is her research that I'm trying to quote right now about in this slide at least. What they did was they took people into an 8-week mindfulness meditation program. And what they did was that they took MR images of them before and after. They also took people who were not meditating in that 8 weeks. So they took their brains also. They took photographs of their brains as well. What is meditation? What would have meant when they said they were meditating? It's not chanting. It is not pranayam. Meditation is focus on non-judgmental awareness of sensations, feelings, and state of mind. This is what meditation was when they did. This is what they were going through, or they were put through in an 8-week program. And then they took the MR images and say. So there were structural changes in the brain. That was helping. It was not just that because I'm spending time relaxing and I'm not doing anything. So, okay, now there is a gap. Now I'm feeling better. So now, therefore, I am feeling nice. No, we were feeling nice. People were feeling nice because the brain had actually changed. There was a physical structural change that happened in the brain. The difference in the brain between the meditators and non-meditators. And this is what happened. Observable thickening of the cerebral cortex or the prefrontal cortex, the executive brain, which is right here, which is what a lot of people, and I'm not bringing any spirituality right now. So we say that humans are better than others because our prefrontal cortex has scope for even enhancing even further. So how much are we enhancing? And there was a thickening of the cerebral cortex. So better decision making, better planning, better self-control, self-regulation, all of that happens because of the prefrontal cortex firing very well. And there was this observable thickening of the cerebral cortex. The increased gray matter density in the hippocampus increased. So people definitely must have felt, if the hippocampus is that your ability to recall, retain information, data, correlate, spatial understanding, memory, self-awareness, compassion, all of the very humane things, they are associated with hippocampus. And so the gray matter in the hippocampus increased. Other associated structures which are related to self-awareness, compassion, and introspection also enhanced. By the way, in meditation, there's a lot of focus on bringing your awareness right in the middle of your head, where you have the three main points of the hormone secretion glands, the pituitary, the hypothalamus, and the pineal gland. So all of those also begin to work well. There was reduction in stress. Also, they were correlated with the decreased gray matter density in the amygdala. So the amygdala, the gray matter density decreased. It does not mean that when amygdala decreases or shrinks, that we will not be able to perceive threat and not react. It's just that the brain's ability to quickly move from amygdala to the other parts of the brain would happen. Otherwise, it'll constantly be in a state of amygdala. It'll always feel threatened. You'll always feel threatened. What is the impact on the DMN? What happens to the DMN, that constant movement or zzz of happening of the brain? You get into the flow when you're doing something very exciting, very interesting, and something that you love, and that's when it keeps quiet. But they found that the DMN kept quiet for longer, was more effective, more profound when people are meditating than when they're given tasks that they really enjoy. So a task-based deactivation is not as great as a meditation-based deactivation of DMN. Long-term meditation clinical implication, decreased DMN activity associated with improved mental performance. Decreased DMN activity has been associated with, and if you listen to Sarah Lazar's talks or her interviews, she would talk about that the biggest impact that meditation has seen right now is happening is people with depression. But if you have high DMN, and let's not bring in meditation right now, if people have high DMN, a lot of chattering happening, then that leads to depression, that can lead to anxiety, addiction, among other disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, reduced attention, reduced work memory performance, schizophrenia. So all of these are associated with high DMN. And the way to reduce the DMN is to do something that you really enjoy, or then see if you can come into some meditation and have a practice of meditation. This mind wandering, this DMN that constantly running, it's called something called the ruminative thinking. Why is this happening to me? Why me always? When will this change? When will somebody help me? Why do they always do to me? Very ruminative. And when you start ruminating, then there is this whole understanding of I am not feeling well, there's a decreased sense of well-being that happens. So although the meditation practice is associated with peacefulness and physical relaxation, practitioners have long claimed that meditation also provides cognitive psychological benefits that persist throughout the day, not that 15, 20, 40 minutes that you're meditating. The benefits are throughout the day. During my meditation, a lot of people say that, I felt very good during the meditation. Or some say, no, I felt like I wanted to just, dig a hole and sit over there. It does not matter what happens during the meditation. The benefits of meditating are they far outweigh the duration during which the meditation is held. So therefore, this is also what the scientists say, that even in spirituality, they say, please don't judge your meditation as good, bad, do it. That's all. So this is the ability for the brain to change is called the brain elasticity or plasticity. And by practicing meditation, this is a quote by Britta Holzell, who's the research fellow in Germany at the Gießen University. It's fascinating to see that the brain's plasticity, and that by practicing meditation, we can play an active role in changing the brain and can increase our well-being and quality of life. So I'm going to end here. They say the brain is young and happening when it is elastic. In a more psychological terminologies, they say your affinity to change. Can you change? It'll only happen when the brain changes. Otherwise, we are sort of set in the way we are. Very difficult for us to, even if we say, okay, no, I'll get up in the morning and do this, or I'll do that, and I know this is right. To action it, to adopt it, to assimilate it takes time, because the brain needs to be more elastic, made more plastic, movable. And that happens because of the meditation. I will end here now, and I have one more interesting data for me to share with you before I open for questions. Sorry about this. Yep. There was also a conversation that does meditation only bring flexibility and freshness to the brain, longevity to the brain, a good functioning brain, not just any brain, a good functioning brain, which has got good cognitive understanding. What else does it bring? Does meditation also bring in longevity otherwise? So I think yesterday or day before yesterday, I came across another interesting piece of research, which says that our chromosomes, at the end of the chromosomes, are something called as telomeres. Now, these are biomarkers for how old or aged we are. How old is the body? What happens are these telomeres, they are typically they look like shoelaces, the end of the shoelaces. So when during a normal course, when the cells are multiplying, cell division, multiplication is happening, the telomeres are not completely replicated. They are not copied fully, because the process is like that, just have to quickly. So over a period of time, when the cells are dividing, the cell ends remain very loose. So not very good quality of cells then get created because the telomeres are compromised. They just keep, that's the way the process, the infrastructure is like that of the body. And they found that people who meditate, their telomeres begin to get restored, even enhanced, because there's an enzyme called telomerase that gets released in the body, which helps in the sustenance and sustenance, not just sustenance, I think even going as far as saying as even they create or build the telomeres for them. So not just the brain lives longer, the quality of life in terms of physical health, of course, also gets better. Of course, those who meditate for over a period of time, for them, longevity has no meaning because they don't associate themselves with their body too much beyond a point. So that is it. I'm going to end my presentation now, and I will open it for question and answers. I hope I haven't shot past the time allocated for me.
No. That was wonderful. Thank you. It was so interesting, so enlightening. It was really wonderful. And we'll open it up. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions.
Sure.
So if anyone wants to ask a question, kindly unmute yourself and ask Anuja the question.
Ms. Anuja, that was wonderful. I have a question for you. But before that, can I see the first slide with the parts of the brain?
Sure.
Because you've spoken about so much, it's nice to visually.
Yep. I'm just taking you there. Just a second. Yeah.
Nice to
It's-
visually
I picked
reconnect.
it up from the, I just picked it up from the Google. So it's nothing that I've created on my own, but I'll anyway share it.
Got it. It is very simple and interesting.
Yeah, it's very simple. Yeah. Here you go.
Right. Interesting. Okay, amygdala. Right. Right. So you mentioned the amygdala is the one that kind of becomes a bit less matter as one meditates, isn't it? Because the fight and flight response is relatively diminished compared to the other functions of the brain.
Because it diminishes, because the gray matter, I mean, that is what they're inferring, that because the gray matter in the amygdala reduces,
Uh-huh.
then our constant response and persistently staying in that space of wanting to fight, flight, or freeze, that
Mhm.
reduces.
Okay.
It is
Anyway.
not behavioral. So the cause and effect are reversed. So it is not because I'm wanting to not fight, flight, or freeze. That is why my amygdala is shrunk. Because my amygdala is shrunk, so I am not doing that. So the brain is still ruling the roost.
Okay, so I think actually many things that you've said are really amazing, and I will anyway sum it up when I do the acknowledgement. But I'll let others ask questions. But before that, one last question I had was the pineal gland. Now, that I understand is strengthened with meditation. So that is not shown in your diagram, but I suppose it's right in the center of the head, isn't it?
Yes. So when we are meditating, there is a lot of emphasis on going in a space which is right in the middle of your of the brain. You just become more aware of it, and that place is called I don't know what it's called in biology, but in spiritual parlance, it's called the Chidakash. That has the hippocampus. It's called the three main glands that are there. And yes, I have not put there because, as I said, I was not a doctor. I did not know what else. This all information kept coming slowly trickling into my head.
Right. I'm just letting the information sink in, but thank you. Really, you opened up so many, material connections to these elusive spiritual awareness that we have so far practiced and got. So I'll sum it up anyway. I'm just kind of letting it all absorb now. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Sanuja.
Welcome. Thank you, Ramesh, for asking questions. Thank you.
Any more questions? Kindly unmute and ask.
I have few questions.
Ed?
I'm Janakira. One is, my first question is, pineal gland comes where? Because that is not shown in the picture, and what is its role?
So, like I said, Mr. Janaki, I think it comes right in the middle. I'm not the right person to really be asking, because I'm told it is there in the middle, where all the hypothalamus, the hippocampus. Or I think it's right behind here, behind the third eye, and you go into the brain, just behind the prefrontal cortex is where the pineal gland is. So it functions. It's called the master gland, apparently, the pineal gland. So it really controls all the other glands of our body. It's supposed to be very exciting.
Okay, maybe you can do some more research on that, because that will be, I'm sure, will be more useful. And my second question is, there are many guided meditations available, and earlier it used to be in CD. Now it is all available through internet, YouTube, and all. First of all, is it right to do guided meditation instead of self-meditation? And second is, how to choose which is the right guided meditation?
Nice question. Thank you for asking. So first is that one should eventually become on their own. This is a path of self. It's a journey into the self. So invariably, one has to get into doing their personal practice. Definitely. And that is what even I encourage the people whom I guide into the meditation. There are a lot of guided meditations which are available on CD, on apps, or on YouTube videos, even recorded videos. A lot of people ask me to give me my recorded voice or my recorded meditations to them. Here is the problem with these kind of content. A, it is static. at that, you are not connected with the guide at that point in time, because it's all about energy. So when I'm taking people through guided meditation, I'm connecting through them at that point in that, because it's all about being in the now. So when I'm connecting as a guide, I'm able to sense, which is why none of our, I think there are 1 or 2 people from my meditation who are attending. No one meditation will be the same, because I'm sensing something, and I keep getting them to contemplate or focus here or focus there. So there's a general broad structure and format of the meditation. I still keep changing it because I'm sensing the energies of the people whom I'm guiding, even though we are connected virtually. The other thing is that all these people, all the guided meditation which come in terms of recorded or app or whatever they may be, they may not have been done by a practitioner himself or herself. It could be somebody who has a very nice voice and they were asked to record a nice audio for you, and which somebody has a nice soothing voice and they would do it. So they themselves may not be practitioners. So they will not be able to guide you. The guidance happens because they are using themselves, or they are using their energy to help you through, guide you through, as part of the one big consciousness that we are. So ideally, a live meditation is always preferred. And also you get a lot of energy because of the group which is meditating simultaneously along with you. There's a lot of power in numbers. So it's nice to attend one of those guided meditation which is happening live by a person who meditates regularly.
Thank you so much. That really helps. My third clarification is you told about the wandering mind,
Yes.
which makes a person unhappy. But some of the teachings or psychologists say even if you wander, because the nature of mind is wandering, you think of happy thoughts and happy moments, and that would really help.
So happy thoughts, yeah. So if you are coming from that place that one is constantly unhappy, so when I'm coaching people who are constantly unhappy, they have a propensity to think unhappy only. By the way, all of us have, and you may have heard this word called sanskars. Sanskar. That is the propensity of our brain to constantly keep thinking, get into a pattern of similar way of responding. So some of us will constantly keep thinking sad, will think bad, will think angry, will think guilt, whatever. How do you make that shift? Think happy is not as easy. No, I tell you, please cheer up. Don't feel bad. Don't feel sad. What is it to feel bad? By just saying that, we cannot do it because the brain is set. You cannot override the brain by cognitively telling the brain to change. I will from now on only think happy. Will not happen. It won't be able to sustain this. So while psychologists are right that one has to train one's brain, and people do training of the brain, by doing through, it's called the neuro-linguistic programming, NLP it's called. They do, but how many of us will do it, and how many of us can do it? And what are the other impacts? There is a method of going beneath something which is so subtle as your brain by becoming even more subtle than the brain. And that's when you begin to impact it. And that's when meditation strikes.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this is Sai here.
Questions?
Yeah, I just have one question. Actually, when I've been exposed to a lot of meditation guides and all for last 5 decades, but I never take to meditation seriously. And I thought it's just activity which works. Finally, when I tried to become a Buddhist 2 years ago, they introduced me to metta meditation. And I was always wondering why it is effective in me. Now I understand the reptilian brain, which always responds, to enemies or a situation, probably gets subdued when you love everything around you and everybody. So, very interesting talk, and thank you for the great learning.
Welcome. Thank you, Sai Prakash. Thank you for your comments. But yeah, because what we want to fight, it could be our spouse only. So, and that time you don't need
No, I cannot just tell my wife to do metta meditation because she says she's always right. And the reptilian brain is very strong. So women's reptilian brain probably is very strong.
I know research has proven yet that, but we'll wait for that to happen. Okay, I think Sanya had her hand up for quite some time.
Yeah, hi Anuja. Lovely seeing you after a long time, and beautiful talk. I missed the beginning bit. I will watch the video, but the rest of it I followed. It's really amazing. You have put it all together, because one thing that I mean, I appreciated everything you said because you brought the scientific side into the world of meditation, which I think this Sarah Lazar has done. And the beauty is all the steps that we learn in yoga, has been, now it's like it's so scientifically documented, taking each part of the brain literally and then saying, now see this, now see that. So it's very unfortunate that today's human society wants all this validation. Apart from the validation, now wants to understand also exactly, so now what happens to this part of the brain and that part of the brain. But rather, if you go just to a little time before when it was done, as in just, you have to just do meditation, whether you go for Zen, whether you go for Vipassana, whether you go in yoga ashram and you do, where they take you first, they'll start with, the practices of yam niyams, then asana pranayama. No problem. That's everyone knows. Yam niyams, they may not know, but yes, they have heard of asana pranayama. Then gradually they take you into pratyahara and then into, dharana. The beauty, what I liked was the way you brought that scientific thing into the flow of from pratyahara, which is the withdrawal of the senses, right? Going within quietly, then dharana, having that one pointed attention and letting that constant dharana flow into what is called dhyana.
That's right.
So I loved it. It is not required, like I said, especially if we are trying to make our mind understand, no, it will only come up with another 10 questions from the back door. So there was a time I was on that trip of wanting, answers to everything. But touch wood, I'm glad that I hear the questions. Oh, I'm not saying the questions don't come. I hear them. I hear them.
Yeah.
And that's all I do. I hear them. I loved your talk. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Sonia. That's wonderful.
There's a question in the chat box. Can you please explain DMN again?
Sure.
By Meher.
Okay, so DMN is called the default mode network. This is something which happens in our brain at all times. The chattering in the brain is something which you can say is because of the DMN that happened. Now, what is DMN doing? It is connecting various components of the brain together. So there are signals and electrical, chemical exchange of information and data happening constantly within various parts of the brain, because the brain has got a message that you are not feeling good, you're feeling threatened. So it's trying to figure out what else, what do I need, what do I retrieve, what can I do? So there's constant moving. So DMN is a lot of chatting, a buzz in the brain, because now it's busy retrieving next plan of action. And typically that plan of action is to fight, flight, or freeze, and not do something more sensible, like let me sit down and think this through, because the amygdala is the one which is firing very fast. So DMN is that constant buzz in the brain all the time. It happens, and it is only reduced or deactivated either when we are doing an activity which we really like, which is if you're playing a sport or playing some musical instrument or painting or doing something creative or whatever. Some people get quietened down and feel they are in the flow when they are even doing coding or doing their work. They really enjoy. Some people get a lot of joy in just cleaning the house or cleaning the clutter of the cupboard. At that time, when the DMN quietens down, because you are not now, inhibitions have all gone. You're no longer feeling that I am this limited being, and all the chattering of before and after has stopped. Then instead you're in the flow. The opposite of DMN is coming into the flow. So the flow happens when you're doing something nice and enjoyable and something that you love. It also happens for people who meditate. So they come into the flow very easily. They are able to change the chatter. They're able to change the conversations in their minds. A lot of people don't even know that the mind has so many conversations that I have to change. They feel this was all part of the scene all the time. It's not like that. So the DMN is not very happy news. It's not designed to give us joy. It is designed to protect us for any threat that we perceive.
Thank you, Anuja. So it stands for data, what please? Data?
It's called default mode network.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Anuja, now there's another question. It's very difficult for people with depression and schizophrenia. Then how do you make them do meditation?
I know. And I would like to say that it is not even if one does not have depression and schizophrenia, it is difficult for a lot of people to do it. There are a lot of people who joined the meditation class and they say it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And then they attended a few and they never came back. So, I'll have to probably now take the spiritual angle. I hope I can do that. Is it all right?
Please do. Please do
Okay.
that.
All right. I see if I can even tie it up technically or physiologically. To be able to break the pattern of the mind, the way it thinks, one needs to have had that little spark or an existing pattern which will break that. So for example, if you have a virus in the system, in a software, for example, in your laptop, there is virus. Is your virus loaded with an antivirus already? That it will take care of the virus attack. Some of us have it, some of us do not have it. The question is in the mind, in our mind, even if there is a speck of light anywhere, can we take that and change how we think? I would like to talk about this gentleman who is the authority on depression. And if you could listen to his lectures, his name is Professor Robert Sapolsky. He's from the Stanford University. You should hear his lectures on depression. He says we have no free will. If we decide to wear what we wear, it is because it's already there in our DNA. We already are pre-programmed, pre-formatted. So depression and schizophrenia is sort of written in the brain. It's physiological. It is not that something we just felt like getting into depression. No, it's actually physiological. It is physical, biology. How do you bring it? How do you change? I have a feeling I do not know how to break it spiritually. I think people around them should first calm down. I think most importantly, people who are schizophrenic and depressed, their family, their first social ecosystem needs to first begin to calm itself down. They said that is what we want to begin to get them to feel slightly more better. And then perhaps you can slowly introduce maybe a 5-minute when they are feeling better. But there's still a lot of debate, though Sarah Lazar says that it has had the most profound effect on people who are depression. But there is a school of thought which says no, depression, people should not go through meditation. So I'm still not clear of all of that yet. I'm still after people who are all right, who are neither depressed nor schizophrenic, and see whether they will come for the meditation or not.
I have a question.
Yes.
Now, regarding this amygdala, the hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex, it seems to occur to me that there is some tie-up between this and the Panchakosha. When we talk about Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha. So Annamaya Kosha is the physical body, so that probably correlates with the amygdala. The hippocampus is the mind, and the prefrontal cortex is the intellect.
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. The Panchakoshas are not aligning to these parts of the brain, not necessarily. Not in that order.
Okay, and one more thing is, I've heard quite recently that we have a number of brains. Like if you look at our Nadi system or other systems, yogic systems, they talk about a number of brains. There's one in the stomach, there's one in the throat, and so on. Of course, these are not physical brains like what you're talking about now, but these brains also can be programmed, and they can also be spoken to, like when you're fasting, for example. So how can you correlate that with what you just spoken today?
Okay, so what you're talking about is the subtle body, and when we are doing the meditation, in our meditation at least, we bring our awareness to the chakra. So what you're saying is there is a brain in the throat and the brain in the stomach. So these are all our chakras. They are these energy centers of our body, and they I believe that they do not get congested. Though healing, people who do healing, they are told that this is got congested or overactive or hyperactivated. Chakras per se do not, nothing happens to them. What happens is our thoughts begin to cloud and block them from them to actually fully influence the part of the body they are resting in, that part of your body. So a heart chakra will get impacted mostly because you're sad, because you're grieving, because there is a sense of loss that is happening. So that is when the heart chakra, so therefore once the heart chakra when you started clarifying the heart chakra, not just that has to be an activity of the meditation that will clear up, you can do through Nad yoga, whatever. There also needs to be an understanding. There's also gyan. There is also the wisdom. Why am I feeling the sense of loss? What have I truly lost? Unless so there is a multi-dimensional changeover that will have to happen for the heart chakra to begin to start, and it does. It begins to then activate better or enhance the working of all the organs around it. So people who get heart or cardiac things, typically the heart chakras are the one with they are nursing some old grief. Same as with the stomach. It has a lot to do with feeling of shame and powerlessness. That's why you find a lot of people who are in the power play, who are politicians typically have big bellies because they always have this thing of power. Their solar plexus is very, very cluttered at that point. So therefore there is all of this. So your sex chakra has to do with guilt. So each of these energy centers of the body that you're talking about, the brain, is typically they get blocked because of specific emotions that we harbor. And all of us have a propensity of, or a tendency to have one or two emotions in higher occurrence.
More predominant.
Somebody who gets angry more faster, I could not be somebody who gets guilty very fast. Somebody gets guilty more fast and sad very less. So, it depends on it's very individualistic then.
So which means what you speak about depression and schizo, for example, could be pre-programmed karmically when you're born. So tendencies.
Because this is a scientific forum, bring karmic in it here, then it will not be very nice to put it. But that school of thought would say yes, it is karmic. Also, it could be genetic. If you eliminate the karma theory, also you could be getting it from your ancestors. It could be part of your DNA that you would get depressed. And if you listen to the people who do, as I said, Robert Sapolsky, listen to his lecture. He says depression, schizophrenia, all of this is part of the biology. It is not that they just stumbled upon it or they just felt bad today. I'm going to wear.
Right. I understand, because even karmically, we choose our parents before we're born, so we have to genetically also satisfy those requirements to allow us to grow in that particular area in this life and so on.
Yeah.
But anyway,
it is another conversation. That is another school of thought about what we have got karmically as against what we have got genetically and science and evolution. What is that saying?
Yeah.
One has to, if I have to appeal or make a case for meditation, I need to make a case for meditation for both schools of
understood.
Who are spiritually inclined and those who are not so spiritual, who want to just see whether it gives me some benefit right now for my physical well-being or not.
Yes, it's a very, very wonderful and wise way to approach it. Thank you.
Thank you. There are a lot of people who have appreciated the talk. It's in the chat. A wonderful session, very nicely presented. Thank you so much, by Prakash. By Preeti, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. Understanding is much more. Loved the talk. From Rajiv, a very informative talk. Thank you. So please go. There are a whole lot of people who appreciated it. Thank you so much. Any more questions, anyone? Any more questions?
I think that they had enough. I think they were running for going back to do meditation now.
Yeah, I have a question.
We have. Okay.
This is Kashmira.
Yeah, Kashmira.
If I have to give suggestions to people that I deal with for guided meditation, is there a resource that you would tell us about your sessions that you have, or where we could go for such sessions?
You could just WhatsApp me. I will, if you can, how do I share my number? You can just WhatsApp me and I can, I'm going to start. I have taken a month's break because you're doing it for quite some time regularly. I'm going to start again on 1st of Feb. So if you like to join, just perhaps see one session as a trial and then see if you like to add or come to the other sessions as well. We do it thrice a week, 48 for a moment, 48 minutes.
You could type a number out, or maybe just tell me, I can type it out.
Okay,
yes, just give your number and we can type it on the chat. Ramesh, please type it on the chat.
Will do.
I'm doing it right now. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you can
look
at
numbers on the chat.
Yeah, you could just find me anywhere. I'm not so much on Facebook. I'm more on LinkedIn, and yeah, you can WhatsApp me and we can get chatting on this.
May I ask you
Okay.
a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Preeti here. I wanted to know when you say that depression is genetic or biological, that means they do have to take medication for that to bring them.
Definitely.
It is.
Uh,
It's not that meditation will help them and they will be fine. It is important for them to see a doctor and take the medication.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is all just aiding. This is all just aiding and doing a more long-term correction of the error. So
Okay.
I would just give you an example, Preeti. When I told you when I had this trajectory moving out, I was in a hardcore sales job. I had these quarterly targets to run and whatnot happening. When I left my job and I thought I was looking for answers, the flow in which I was, and another flow that we spoke about, the intensity of work was so high. I was diagnosed with hypertension. I had to take medicines for my high blood pressure for some time. I mean, I kept taking it for some time. And then I was doing all that I was doing. And it took me about 3-4 years for my physician GP to say that I think you can halve this dosage. You don't need to take so much. I don't see major BP issues with you. And after 2 years, they completely took me off the medication. So I did take the medicine, but I did continue with the practice. And since then, I haven't had the need to get back to any medication then.
That's very heartening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? All right. So it was really a wonderful session, a lot of questions. It was really so good. And now that we've come to the end of it, I request Ramesh to propose a formal vote of thanks. Ramesh?
Thank you, Sajni. Right. Now, do you want to complete the slide, Sajni? Dr. J.M. Sampath or?
Okay. Next Thursday, it's Being Mindful by Dr. Sampath. And again, it's about the mind. So I would like all of you to please join it and tell your friends, because we get fantastic speakers every week. We do not charge anything, and all of them do it for us voluntarily. So kindly tell your friends so that we have more and more people. We have started this year. And also, if you'd like any specific talks, please write to us and let us know. Those of you who are not on the WhatsApp, kindly give your number in the chat box and we'll add you to the WhatsApp group so that you get information on all that we're doing at the school. Thank you. And now it's over to you, Ramesh, for the Loka Samasta and the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sajni. Well, I think many of our people here have said it. Mr. Anuja Jacob, that was lovely. You spoke with a lot of not only experience, it was just authentic, down to earth, and you connected at multiple levels. I think this is like what you said, it's very important for people who are scientifically or maybe materially inclined, as well as people who are spiritually inclined. They both can connect. That's the kind of presentation you gave. Of course, I mean, for all of us here who are into meditation and regularly, or at least we're exposed to spiritual, wisdom. It was very interesting, actually, the way you showed us the cross section of the brain, because your default mode network, the DMN, and all the research that goes along with it by Sarah and so on. Yeah, Lazar, and so on, just kind of strengthens what was earlier a fact that had to be experienced. Earlier, you had to have faith in your guru and you had to go through the meditation and experience it. And only with a very strong faith over a certain period of time does it kind of really enroll the modern intellectual mind. That just really, really works. Whereas over here, you've given us a shortcut, actually, by suddenly putting research data, and that is so, tangible over here. Yeah. Now, you basically, to sum up what you said, you spoke about your slides spoke about the default mode network, the DMN, which is the largest network of functionally correlated brain areas. And you spoke about the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. When you spoke about the amygdala, And you spoke about this being the most primordial and the reptilian part of the brain, which has a fight, flight, or freeze. That kind of suddenly gave me a realization that, my goodness, many of us, when we are frozen in life, we don't realize it. When we're stuck in our lives, it is that elementary reptilian brain that is ruling the roost. And probably this is where our Kundalini, they show the snake rising, that kind of links up with that allegory. And the hippocampus, basically, and the prefrontal cortex, they seem to go to higher levels of consciousness. Now, it was quite remarkable when I heard you saying that the DMN is active when we are not present, when we are not in the moment, when we're not in a space of joy. And surprisingly, I did not realize for most of us, I think that is for most of us, that this is the default mode the brain is in. That is really surprising.
That's why the name DFM. That is why default mode network.
It's so surprising to think that this is the default mode when we say that we are, as a soul, we are Satchitananda, we are always in a state of bliss, but the brain is challenging that and helping us re-experience the bliss through our own hard work and effort and self-realization. So that struck me, and if we are unhappy, it'll normally be in the state when our mind is wandering. And we feel our best when the DMN is quiet, and that really happens when we're being in the flow. We feel our best. We're doing something, especially when we're most creative, when we feel most self-actualized. The flow is really kind of flowing. So the brain's default mode being the opposite of this enjoyable state is something that now we have definitely to. I think many of us here whose mind is so active, we really have to come to terms with and take care of that. So I can't thank you enough. And also, when you mentioned that this can be also genetically pre-programmed before we're born, when we have a propensity for it, that was another striking thing, which means that probably sometimes it runs in certain families. I mean, I can see it in my own family. There's a lot of emotions. There are many people who tend towards that side. So I can see where that is coming from. And if we suitably, put in the other qualities that complete the picture for ourselves, then we can easily get access to helping these people come out of these situations. So thank you so much, Ms. Anuja Jacob. That was really nice. Thank you, and God bless you.
For the spiritual dimension that you have, you're aware of the prarabdha karma, right? So that's just there. You can't really circumvent or transcend any of that. But even the prarabdha karma, there is a slight hope, and you may have heard it in the scriptures, says that you do have the ability to move and to change. It's not that you are just tied over there. You can
very much. Yes.
If you have even a glimmer of thing to change. So that's called the propensity to change, or the ability wanting to change. That happens in a lot of corporate parlance. It happens in spiritual parlance. It's happening everywhere right now. So we better start thinking about it now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was very engrossing, and I'm sure it connected many dots for many of us. Really, God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. See you soon again.
Thank you.
We have the Loka Samasta.
Yeah.
Kindly think of all the people suffering all over the globe. So please sit quietly, and Ramesh will chant the Loka Samasta. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajni. So on that note, let us just move away from the active DMN. That must be the DMN beeping. So let us move away from that. Let us sit straight with the back, neck, and head aligned. Let us connect with each other, because this network that is there in our brain is also connected to the larger network of all of us as consciousness, as a soul. And let us touch each other's heart. We will then experience a surge of energy. And do this Loka Samasta for all those in our communities who need support right now in these trying times. Many of them will feel the difference if we just, through these prayerful words, these prayerful songs, we reach out to them with love and truth. Take a deep breath. Let go. Center yourself. Observe the silence between the words. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat Brahmarpanamastu. Thank you, everyone. Good night. God bless.
So much, Ramesh. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. It was a wonderful session. And we look forward to seeing you again next Thursday, same time at 6:30. Once again, I wish each and every one of you a very, very happy, healthy,